Chapter 7. The Acadam lay on fog-shrouded cliffs at the very edge of the ocean. This wasn't some tropical beach with white sand and palm trees. No, it was a rainy, windswept coast with a rippling expanse of coarse grass and a beach of gray pebbles. It was strangely beautiful, though, and I had the uncomfortable thought that I might not mind it here. The building itself was a sort of castle, although it would never have been defensible. The walls sported large, beautiful windows, and underneath the moss and vines. The stone was so clean that the building almost looked new. Damon caught me looking and pointed to tiny carvings set at regular intervals. "Sorcerers don't like things like lichen colonizing their pretty walls," he said, with a grin. "They're very picky about aesthetics. What, and druids aren't." I cracked my first smile since our history lesson. "Lichen doesn't seem all that different to me than moss," he said with a shrug. "Stones weather, that's the way of things. There are beetles and birds making nests and mice finding little scraps of food. Humans try to build permanent things, but that's not how most of the world works. In nature, things are constantly making way for other things." He smiled. "But we build things, like the druidic arts, that survive for thousands of years. And there's a beauty in that, too." I looked down at my feet. When Damon spoke, the world seemed to make sense. I supposed maybe things got clearer after 500 years. Then again, the monarchists had clearly come to very different conclusions. The path to the castle appeared as if out of nowhere, and I had the sudden suspicion that if I weren't with Damon, I would have seen neither path nor building. We stepped through a gate that swung open silently on oiled hinges and walked into a large courtyard that had been made into a garden, full of benches and arbors, out-of-season flowers blooming in a bewildering profusion of scents. I looked over to see what Damon thought of this, and he shared a smile. "It's one of the least strange things you people do," he said with a wry smile. "My people?" I let that one slide. People stared at us as we walked, heads turning to acknowledge Damon, and give me a curious examination. They clearly knew the druid by sight, as I supposed they would, and therefore they knew exactly why I was here. It made me feel like they knew more about me than I did. A boy with deep brown skin and the widest smile I'd ever seen came pelting through the garden in a shower of rose petals, screaming Damon's name, and Damon picked him up to swing him around in the air. The boy shrieked with laughter and pelted off again, and Damon watched him go with a smile. "I brought him here a few years ago," he explained. "His parents didn't want to give him up. It was hard to convince them, but they knew it was best, in the end. They've been able to see him a few times since he came here." I nodded silently. Something had unknotted in my chest when I saw the boy's uncomplicated adoration of Damon. He'd been so happy to see the man who brought him here, and I didn't know what to think of that. Sarah wouldn't like it, I knew. But Sarah wasn't here, seeing this place. Damon pointed up to the top of the tallest tower, an almost a picturesque confection of white stone with trailing vines and stained glass windows. "That's where you'll be tested. Sorcerers also like all the trappings. You know, tall towers, magic wands, leather-bound books. Some of them even like those pointy hats." He was trying to set me at ease, but my heart was beating so fast that I thought I was going to be sick. I tried not to be too obvious about wiping my clammy palms on my shirt as we made our way into the building and to the winding staircase that led up to the tower. The stairs narrowed for a time, and I let myself sink into the pattern of going around and around, watching the worn stone steps and the blocks of the walls. When the stairs widened to show a set of ornate double doors, Damon stopped me. "It's not a test to worry about," he told me seriously. "They aren't going to try to exhaust you or anything like that. It's just to show them what kind of magic you have, that's all. Why? So they know how to train you. Whatever your magic is, there's probably a student here who can do something similar. For instance, if it's ice, they can show you things to do with ice and frost, useful applications. They'll teach you how to use it so you don't split the sides of houses or explode glass. That sort of thing." Oh, I opened my mouth to ask another question, and then remembered that I wasn't intending to learn any magic. "Okay, let's go in." Damon was right about sorcerers liking the trappings of magic. The floor was a beautiful black and white inlay that wouldn't have looked out of place in Versailles, and paintings on the ceiling showed astronomical diagrams and gold-etched runes. At the far side of the room were 5 chairs that could only be described as thrones. The center chair, grander than the rest, stood empty, and the others held a group of surprisingly young people in flowing robes. I frowned, and then remembered how old Damon was and realized that they probably weren't anywhere near as young as they looked. Damon, one of the women, an ornate braid of flaming red hair draped over one shoulder, smiled at Damon and, more reservedly, at me. "Maggie." Damon smiled back. "Where's Tarek?" "Away." The woman's face had gone carefully blank. Apparently Julius had something to show him. Not a single member of the group betrayed even a hint of emotion, but I could feel displeasure radiating from Damon. And I knew enough to judge their silence. Whoever Julius was, they clearly hated him. I see, Damon said shortly. He gestured to me. This is Nicky, the talent I went in search of a few weeks ago. Nicky, this is the Coimil. They oversee the Acadam. I nodded my head nervously. None of the members of the Coimil spoke to me. Instead, they looked to Damon for an explanation of who I was. I found her in the company of a monarchist agent, Damon explained. Her mind has been shrouded. She does not know what her power is, nor does she have any memory of using it. I verified that. She knows little more than her name. Do you know how old you are, my dear? Maggie looked at me kindly, but there was an impersonal assessment behind that gaze. To her, I realized I was a rebel. A 5-year-old couldn't be held accountable for knowing about the Acadam. But I had clearly been raised on the run. That was why they looked to Damon for an explanation. They didn't trust me. If everything went well, however, they would trust me a bit more in a moment. I don't know. I shook my head. And I have a request. Out of the side of my vision, I saw Damon look at me sharply, but I didn't look back. I didn't want to see his sad expression again at the thought of me giving up magic. He had chosen what he was. I hadn't. Yes, a man with long black hair regarded me without any visible emotion in his eyes. I would like you to remove my magic, I explained. I don't want it. I don't want to learn how to use it. I would rather you just took it out of me. You could wipe my memory, right? Then I wouldn't know about this place to be a danger to you. There was a silence. Damon looked away from me, and I tried not to feel bad about disappointing him. I'd forget him, too. The thought was sudden and unwanted. That made me sad. Maybe I shouldn't care, but I did. There has to be a way to do this, doesn't there? I looked between the blank faces. Doesn't there? I repeated. The Coimil looked amongst themselves. If they were speaking mind to mind, I wasn't sure. Certainly, their faces betrayed nothing. No, a woman said finally. She had the darkest skin I had ever seen, and close-cropped hair. She shook her head regretfully. You are a sorcerer. Your magic is a part of you. It cannot be removed without killing you as well. I swallowed. The walls seemed a little closer than they had a moment ago. I was going to be stuck here. I hadn't thought of this place as a prison when I didn't think I'd be staying, but suddenly the thought that I might live here was unbearable. I would be shut inside these walls for years. When they gave me my memory back, I would remember everyone I had left behind, and no matter what Damon said. The Acadam was never going to let me go back to the monarchists. I felt Damon's hand on my shoulder, and I shook it off instinctively. I knew he was trying to comfort me, but I found myself hating him right now. He was here because he'd chosen to become a druid. He'd trained for years, choosing it over and over. I hadn't wanted any of this. I was being imprisoned for something that wasn't even my doing. Now I understood what Sarah had meant when she said she had gotten to live her entire life in freedom. The man lifted his fingers, and I felt a rush of sudden warmth in my chest. Your powers have been unblocked, he told me. I looked down at myself, and then around the room. I wasn't sure what I expected. Fireballs, maybe. Whatever the case, unblocking my magic seemed to have done nothing at all. It was almost disappointing. I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I barely noticed the cage appearing in front of me. I jumped when I saw it. It was the strangest cage I had ever seen, about as high as my knees. Every bar seemed to be made of something different: stones, metals, wood, glass. One bar even seemed to be made of pure sapphire. Inside, a brown and white rabbit wiggled its nose at me. We administer this test to all newcomers. The fourth member of the Coimil spoke now. She had wide-set, slanted black eyes and a round face. Her lips moved differently than the words she said. She was speaking another language, and somehow imparting her meaning to me. There is a cloud of poison there. She pointed to a faint, greenish shimmer in the air. It was drifting toward the cage slowly but surely. We trust you will not let the rabbit die. I saw the man settle back in his chair. His eyes were closed. He was administering the test, I guessed. Beside him, Damon had taken a place next to the chairs in a warrior's crouch, his elbow braced on his knee. I looked at the rabbit. The rabbit looked at me, and hopped in a curious circle around the edge of the cage. I told myself that it wasn't real, but it definitely seemed real. I could smell the scent of its fur, and when I knelt to poke my fingers through the bars, I felt the touch of its whiskers as it sniffed me. I tried to remember how to do my magic, and found nothing in my head. I paged through every memory I had, and I couldn't remember a single thing before that forest. There had been yelling. Someone introduced me to Sarah, running, and Sarah's fight with Damon. Nothing about my magic. I don't know how to do this, I said blankly. None of the Coimil said anything. Damon. I looked at him pleadingly. I don't know how to save it. He said nothing. His face was clear. He gave me a tiny smile of encouragement, but he was clearly forbidden to say anything. I rattled the bars of the cage. The wood, I reasoned, I could probably break. But for some reason, it didn't so much as bend, even when I put all my strength behind it. I wound up and punched the glass bar as hard as I could, and got nothing for my trouble but an aching hand. The cloud of poison, meanwhile, had gotten about halfway to the cage. Look, I don't know how to do this. My voice was getting more and more panicked. I don't. You can't just let the rabbit die. I had the horrifying realization that this animal was going to be the second person in a week to die because of my magic. And dashed tears out of my eyes with the back of my hand. Still, no one said anything. I tried to waft the poison away, and succeeded in getting chemical burns on my hand that forced me to yank my arm back with a cry. It's going to die. I shouted at the man doing the test. It's going to die because I don't know how to do this. Just put the test off, take the blocks out of my memory, then I'll know how to do this. But I don't know how to do it now. His face didn't even flicker. I fought the urge to stomp my foot. Stop the test. I put as much command into my voice as I could. Stop it. Stop it. Nothing. I looked at them all wildly. None of you. Not one of you is going to save this animal. Still nothing. Fury was beating a steady rhythm in my heart. Stop it. I yelled the words, knowing he wasn't going to listen, but I didn't know what else to do. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. And then the anger that had been rising up in my chest this whole time at the useless cruelty of this found an outlet. Where? I didn't know. How? I didn't know. I just knew that if I stopped the man who was doing this, the poison might go away. And I threw everything I had into making that happen. His chair disintegrated in a shower of splinters and dust, and I heard screams. Something knocked me flat on my back and held me in place, and the only thing I could see was the air around me fizzling and dripping as if I had unleashed a poison of my own. The cage was gone, and the rabbit with it. I couldn't see the poison at all, for which I was grateful. My hand still stung like I'd dipped it in acid. There was the sound of a door opening, and running footsteps, and I was hauled upright a few moments later. Held between two guards. My muscles didn't seem to be working, and my head lolled to the side as I tried to take in the scene. Damon had come to his feet, his eyes horrified, and the Quimiel were staring at me like I was the devil incarnate. I couldn't save it. Whatever sent me over backwards had knocked some teeth loose. I could taste blood. I had to stop you. You were going to kill it. There was a long pause. Maggie turned her head to look at Damon. We will call Tarek back, she said simply. He will deal with this. She pushed herself up and came to me, laying a single finger over my heart. I felt ice spread inside me, and had one moment of sheer terror before her eyes met mine. Your powers are blocked. You will not be able to use any magic to harm another. There was no warmth in her now. We cannot take the risk of you doing such a thing again. She nodded to the guards. House her in one of the tower rooms. Wait just a moment. Damon's voice was worried. She didn't do this to hurt Akihito. We will talk about this later, was all Maggie said. Heedless of the discussion, the guards turned me around on my useless legs and dragged me toward the door. She didn't mean to hurt him, Damon was saying. Tarek will deal with this, another voice cut in. And then the doors slammed shut behind the guards, and I had the dizzying sensation that I was entirely alone. He had promised. There were tears of fury in my eyes. Damon had promised me that there was nothing to worry about, and he had been wrong. Because apparently there was a way to fail the test, and I had done it.